If you want to print miniatures and someone will tell you to increase the extrusion width of your line to 0.8 millimeters from 0.42, for example, you will think he's crazy. But what if I tell you that those miniatures are almost the same and I did the one 0.42 and one 0.8 extrusion width? Well, the results are unexpected, because I was thinking that if we're gonna increase the extrusion width to 200% of the nozzle diameter, well, it will hide some details and textures, but just take a look on these models. Today I use PLA matte from the Filament in October red color, because we can see as much details as possible on this color, and also the Spectrum PLA Pro Pastel Turquoise, because we can see a lot of weird details around. We have few 3D models printed here, especially with the textures, because they will be affected the most. Let me do some work and you can watch it, and I will talk about it in the meantime. So for the starters we have Goku with Pastel Turquoise. To be honest, I'm not sure which one is which, because they are looking almost the same on the first glance, but I have a small defect that I know that which one is which. I'm gonna tell you that in a moment, but first let's remove the supports. It wasn't that hard as I was expecting. Okay, more or less, I'm gonna just clean up the 3D model and we can take a look on the details. I'm not gonna hide the fact that I was trying to print it very fast, so the details are a bit distorted, but still the overall look looks okay. So this is the first model. Okay, so first of all, why do you want to change extrusion width while printing miniatures? Well, because we want to save some time. I reduced the walls to 1 with the wider extrusion, so we can save a lot of time, almost 30% faster printing. But let's see what is the trade-off. Looking at these two 3D models, you can already see something weird happening, because on the back, especially in the weak spots, I mean, I can tell it weak spots, we can see that there is some holes in the walls, because the one model that has only one wall, it will have not enough material to cover up some seams and some holes, while two walls with 0.42 millimeters extrusion width will have enough material to cover up everything. So overall the model with two walls looks better. However, if you're gonna see the details on for example, bottom part here on the pants and maybe on the chest, whatever the small sharp edges are, it's still visible. You can still see the details, the sharp corners, the sharp elements. So there is not so much difference on it. So thinking about printing miniatures with different extrusion width, it's not a bad idea, but we need to think about how to cover up those holes, because maybe you want to just choose two walls and still use the wider extrusion rate, but maybe in the infill or maybe in the inner wall. So the outer wall still looks sharp. But as I said before, on the first glance it's really hard to see the difference. Let's go to the John Wick, because John Wick was printed with October Red PLA matte. It was printed very slowly, so it will be a little bit shiny. Let's remove the supports. Hopefully I will not break the John Wick itself. But so far, so good, nothing broke. I also need to mention that I was printing October Red on MK4S, on Prusa MK4S, and the turquoise was printed on Core 1 Plus. Okay, slowly and careful. If I would need to guess, I would say that maybe this model was having just one wall, because it was harder to remove the supports. But maybe I'm wrong. Now here is the hard part. Okay, no, I was wrong. This is two wall. I will show you in a second how do I know that. Because again, at the first glance, if you want to inspect the 3D model, the miniature or the details on it, you won't see too much difference. Take a look at these two models. Do you see any difference looking at it? Well, it's really hard to spot anything, especially if you look at the details. They are looking very, very similar, and it's really hard to spot it. So the main thing when it comes to the differences, you can see that somewhere around here, the one wall model has a hole here, because it was too sharp corner to cover with one wall, even with 0.8 millimeter extrusion width, where the two wall model had enough time, enough material to go twice and cover up any hole. I was expecting that if we're gonna see the small gun in his hand, we will see the differences in the details, because 0.8 millimeter extrusion width will be having, tougher time to cover everything as sharp as 0.42 millimeter extrusion width. But even looking at the guns, it's really hard to see the difference. But looking at John Wick miniature, I think this model is a bit taller and it has more vertical walls than the horizontal ones. So there is not so much differences between them. So maybe this is a better choice to use something like that where it's less details. But even looking at his clothing, you don't gonna see too much differences in the details, in the wrinkles and sharp edges. Even his pockets are visible very good. But still, if you want to get like the best results on the miniatures, you should go with the 0.2 millimeter nozzle, the smaller one, and also lower layer height, because everything today was printed with 0.2 millimeter layer height, and extrusion width supposed to be 0.4 for 0.4 millimeter nozzle and 0. For example 27 for 0.2 millimeter nozzle. So to be honest, yeah, those are looking almost the same. It's really hard to spot the difference. But if you really want to see the big difference, I made this very, very small benchmark 3D models to compare what is the biggest difference. Those two models are basically the same, but printed with different settings, right? So if I'm gonna put one on the top of the another, maybe you will already see the difference. I will give you a few seconds so you can inspect it with your eyes and see what is missing on one of these elements. Because I made some holes, I made some extrusions, 1 millimeter, 2 millimeter extrusions outside, and maybe some sharp edges and some round edges. So probably you've already seen that this model, its top model, it's missing some lines here, because the top one was printed with 0.8 millimeter extrusion width. So even the sign, the spectrum, the small spectrum and the bigger spectrum on the top and the bottom, they are almost the same. So even if the nozzle is printing small details which are outside the model a little bit, they will still be visible and the details will still be present. But if you want to see very sharp edges, well, those two lines on the end, on the bottom model, they were extruded 0.5 millimeter outside and they were having a chamfer. So it means they were a little bit cutted around. So it's not like simple square, it has this weird steps, right? The small extrusion width, 0.42, had enough space, enough time to extrude this line, extrude this small feature here. But 0.8 millimeter, well, the extrusion line was so wide, it doesn't have enough calculations for the Arachne wall generator to actually print out those small features here, those small vertical lines. So, in short, those very sharp edges are very hard to print if they are too small for the extrusion width, And the other side, we have those round small edges, and they are going from, I think it was from 2 millimeters to 0.2 millimeters, and basically they are looking almost the same, where the bottom part, which has 0.42 millimeter extrusion width, they managed to print the last two or last one line that was about 0.2 millimeter outside the 3D model. But the top one was almost impossible. The small holes here, they are looking almost the same. There is no visible differences between them. So I think the inside printing, it's not as affected as the outside printing of the 3D model. But you need to see something from the top. Having wider extrusion width will affect the top layer as well. Because having too much material going around here, we don't gonna have enough time to close the gaps between infill and outside wall. On 0.42 millimeter extrusion width, we also can see small two gaps on the biggest extrusions, but it is easier for the printer to close those gaps than those. So this is the differences. Okay, let's go to the more practical 3D models. Let's take a look at these two gears. This is not a practical gear, this is just like a gimmick for showing off what is the difference, right? So they are printed this way. And from the top you can see different patterns for the printing. And from this side you don't gonna notice anything different because both are printed with two walls. So there was no change in this, but having wider outer wall, well, didn't change too much. It still looks the same, and Arachne generator still was able to produce the same model. So there is no difference here. Let's go to the vase mode. If you're gonna take a look at these two boxes with, of course, use bump mesh tool to create this nice brick texture, you don't gonna see too much difference. Maybe this one is a little bit more shiny, but let's take a look. It was printed in vase mode, and if you want to guess which one was having the wider extrusion, can you guess it? It was this one or maybe this one. What do you think? It's hard to say, right? Well, the only way that I can say it and show it to you is to show you the actual extrusion width on the top, because I can see that this one was 0.8 and this one was 0.4. Even if you're gonna squeeze it, you can feel that this one is lighter and this is more squishy. So yeah, looking at the external texture, it's the same. So I think using the wider extrusion on the something like that the texture doesn't really matter and doesn't have any sharp edges, and it's only like a visible feature, not like practical feature, it's gonna work very good. So it's gonna make your model a bit more sturdy. And the last model for today are those two containers. So again, try to guess which one is which. We have small texture here on the bottom of this, let's say, container or jar, how do you want to call it, doesn't really matter. And can you see the difference? Can you see anything different here? I would like to tell you also that we have on the lid, on the sides, we have small texture that is very, very tiny. It's super tiny, it's very hard to say, it's very hard to spot, but it is there. And you probably already noticed that this lid on this side was closed better, and this lid had some issues while printing because the thread was going a little bit, off the plan. So I'm gonna just tell you, the wider extrusion was 0.8 millimeter was this one. And I was surprised that it's actually printed a bit better than the 0.42, but maybe because we have enough space to grab each line to each layer, you know what I mean. The only way you can spot the difference which one is which is by looking also on the layers on the top, or if you want to see the texture from the close-up, if you're gonna see at the texture, you're gonna see that the one that was wider was having a little bit more sagging on the texture between the layers, and the 0.42 was a bit more crisp, this one. So having wider extrusion width will not necessarily hide any details. It depends what details are and how small they are. If you have some small vertical edges that needs to be very, very sharp, maybe it's not the best idea to make 0.8 millimeter extrusion width. But looking at the results of those models, you can basically use it most of the time. and your 3D model will still look good. Try to change some settings in your slicer at Advanced tab and maybe you will find something really useful. I personally love to print with a higher extrusion width than a default, but it's up to you. That's all for today. I hope you learned something and maybe you will subscribe to our channel, like this video and leave a comment if you like to print with 0.8mm extrusion width or not. I invite you to visit our store to get those filaments 10% off using code SPECTRUMYT10. Thank you so much for watching and I hope see you in the next one.